So now we're walking by the Pomona Gallery, collection of 19th century watercolors. And this is for any Apple fan, any forager to come into this room and see these displays of paintings, water art. Oh my goodness, Pomona, the appendix of fruit trees and cider from like 1664. Just an incredible display here. Copper cider tokens. These are small coins with little apple trees on it. If you are in the cider world and you want to have some inspiration, remembering like why you're here, how you got here, and those before you, this is where you come. Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Hip, hip, hooray! This is episode 449 of Cider Chat, and we are headed to the Museum of Cider, which is based in Hereford, England. We're going to be speaking to Elizabeth Pimblett, who is the museum director. And we had a sit-down conversation. We also did a tour and walked about. I'm going to be putting in a little clip there where we actually go into the basement level, which is part of this massive series of caves. At one time, when this was the Bulmer's Cider Factory, they had 3 miles of underground caves. We were actually able to experience some of these caves being underground and how they've worked out the exhibits there. It really gives you this sense of the history. So we'll be doing that and also having a chit-chat with Elizabeth and getting a little baseline of what this museum's all about. It is a definite must-do bucket list item for anyone who enjoys cider and perry and the history surrounding apples and some of these amazing artifacts that you're not going to be able to see anywhere else. So make sure that you have a full cup beside you because you are in for a treat and a little bit of a tease. So we are headed there on the upcoming 2025 Totally Cider Tour UK edition this coming summer, and I can't wait to go there with a whole bunch of folks and just enjoy that experience and see Elizabeth again and all the friendly faces at the museum. It's really super place and so inspiring. But I'm going to kind of hold back and contain my enthusiasm for now because, as always, we're first going to go to a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. With this here episode, we are only one more episode away from completing Season 9 of Cider Chat, which means there'll be 450 plus, because there's a couple extra episodes in there, in the archives at ciderchat.com, with conversations from makers all over the world. And one of the ways that this podcast gets support to stay online is by folks out there in Ciderville becoming patrons or hitting the donate button, both links of which you can find at ciderchat.com. So what happens is folks will sign up or hit donate button, and I'll send them a thank you letter and ask them to answer a couple questions so I could get to know who's listening. And this one came in from Donatus, who is the maker of what's going to be the first commercially licensed cidery in Lithuania. I actually had a sit-down interview with him while I was attending CiderCon 2025, so that episode will be coming up. And I want to say his Kieved cider and ice cider at CiderCon was really the talk of the town. It was absolutely outstanding, so bravo for that. And the fact that you also became a patron. So this is what Donatus wrote to me. He says, "What a database. I will need quite a lot of time to dive in, especially the kieving, which is the main technique here at Sodo Sidena, which means a garden cider in Lithuanian." He continues with, "I found this podcast via social media, and I am trying to follow what is going on in all main cider regions. My favorite guest is Tom Oliver, not only in your podcast, but at any cider event. Tom is a great inspiration, and because he is so generous sharing his knowledge, my progress as a cider maker is much faster. And I feel very privileged to visit Tom at his farm or meet him at the cider events. My favorite topics are personal stories of cider makers and sharing their cider making techniques, like kieving, hop cider, etc. I do have a particular style of cider, but it does depend upon the meal which I am planning to have. In most cases, it will be a dry tannic or cube cider with some residual sweetness. Instead of dessert, I would always choose a small glass of ice cider with the best French Roquefort cheese, which I can get. And on hot summer evenings, cold, slightly hopped, light acid-forward cider could be my option as well. Well, thank you so much, Donatus, and thank you for becoming a patron of Cider Chat. We'll be looking forward to that featured conversation with you coming up in Season 10. Our second newest patron is based in New England, and his name is Gregory, and he wrote, "What a wonderful surprise to discover the cider community. Thank you for all your work. I discovered the podcast when I visited Michael and Nancy Phillips' website to get details on their Orchard Intensive. And I just mentioned Michael Phillips in last week's episode. He passed away way too young, amazing author all on holistic orchard care. So that's who Gregory's referring to here. He continues with, I met Michael years ago at a NOFA, Vermont meeting. While I mostly saw him at other meetings over the years, we had a special bond. I'm a recovering horticulturist. I spent nearly 30 years in the horticultural business in Massachusetts, sold that in 2007, and moved to Vermont to farm biodynamically. But I got distracted for 15 years starting another business, Farmers to You, to support organic and holistic farmers in selling their foods directly to Boston families. 5 years ago, I finally settled on my farm here in Cabot, Vermont, and started planting cider apples and other fruit at the young age of 65. Way to go, Gregory. You do it. I love it. And Cabot, Vermont, that's the home of Cabot cheese. Beautiful, beautiful location in a very special spot in Ciderville. He goes on with, my journey with cider started back in college at the University of Bristol in the West Country of England, at the Coronation Pub in Clifton, a few blocks from our dorm. One of the best ciders I had was Cyril Zhang's Key Cider, an epiphany. While waiting for my trees to mature and begin to yield, a group of friends formed the Feral Cider Society here in northern Vermont. We collect feral apples all along our back dirt roads and press and make cider. I'm ready to get serious now, and thanks to your community, want to learn from the masters. Aw, thank you so much. Thanks to Greg, and thanks to Donatus and the community that is helping to keep cider going up. Search for Cider Chat and Patreon. That's spelled Patreon, or hit the donate button at ciderchat.com. Walking through the orchards. Up next is our featured presentation. It's a conversation with Elizabeth Pimblett, the museum director at the Museum of Cider. We're going to be having a sit-down conversation, and then a little bit in between, I'll be putting in a clip that I recorded while walking in the underground level at the Museum of Cider. And we'll be finishing out hearing more about how you could visit the Museum of Cider and make plans today to get there, which means this is a perfectly fine time to grab a glass and join this chat with Elizabeth Pimblett, the museum director at the Museum of Cider, based in Hereford, England. You've been in this role at the Museum of Cider for a number of years now, right? Since the beginning.
So I've been here since October 2016, and then of course we had the two COVID years. So it's very strange, isn't it, how time has telescoped because of that. So it sounds like I've been here for a long time, but actually those two chunks out of the middle have made it seem still quite fresh. And I still can remember the first October here when I came. I met Gillian Bulmer, who was one of our trustees, and she said, I'm going to do a heritage apple display. And I remember thinking, why on earth am I involved in putting out a display of heritage apples? And then that became one of the great annual things that we've done. So,
oh my goodness. Wow.
Learned a lot in the role.
Let's give folks an idea of what to expect at the museum, because there are different cider museums around the world, but this one has a very special flavor to it, really because of its connection to the history here in this region.
I think the actual building itself marks us out. It is a unique building. It was started by the Bulmer brothers in 1887. And when people come to the museum now, you approach really the back end, so you don't really realise how historic it is. There's a big plate glass window, which was a window into the distillery, because the museum was the first place in 200 years to get a license to distill cider brandy. The bricks at the front of the museum, actually, they are Victorian, but they came from another cider factory, Godwin Cider Factory, which was one taken over by Bulmers. So originally on this site was a single-storey brick, what the Bulmer brothers called a shack, which, if I had a shack like that in my garden, I'd be very, very impressed, because it was quite nicely built. But then they started excavating cellars. And so when this was the biggest cider factory in the world, it had about 3 miles of cellars, something like that.
My goodness.
And we still got quite a large footprint of cellars underneath the building. And that hasn't really survived elsewhere. So the building itself is fascinating.
And now we're actually in the basement, in the cellars of the original Bulmers factory that the museum has taken over here. By the Bulmers display, you walk down the stairs and you come into this room. It's a rather long room with the walls just lined with like holes where the bottles would go in, and they would do like a riddling form here. So you have that display, there's seating, you get to see videos of how they did the riddling, if you will. And now I'm in a concave ceiling type of room, dark walls, almost feels like a distillery, blackened by the stills with barrels here. And you're following a little pathway, seeing barrels and small jugs, a whole display, just giving you a sense of what it was like making cider at that time. So different and yet similar, because we have a lot of the caves, right? And now you walk into this room, I look from the barrel, I turn, and my eyes just, boom, opened up. Walls and walls of stacked bottles, all green bottles, all put in position. And you got to come here. I'm not going to reveal the photos. You have to come here to see it. They have straw sleeves here that they would put the bottles in. Now that alone is worth a visit to me. I mean, you think, oh, how did they move these bottles? They weren't in like big boxes. You didn't have like boxes to make. You would have straw. And how brilliant is that?
It's very interesting to hear some of the oral histories about this, because some of the women say that the insects came off the straw packaging. They used to get bitten. It was one of their least favourite jobs.
Oh dear, I bet. You wouldn't even think about that.
But how environmentally friendly is that?
Very environmentally friendly, except for the insects kind of like going from like, you know, shipping. I mean, that's the way things travel, right? So you are... As you're walking through the Cider Museum, you see lots of posters, and you're following this like little green road that's painted on the ground, a little pathway that just goes endless. This is a little museum. This is a very, very big museum with a lot to see here. You want to give yourself some time. You don't come here for a half hour. Give yourself a couple hours. You could go to the cafe, you could purchase some cider, and just take it in. Now we're looking at an office room here in the basement. This would have been for kind of like the overseer of this part of the production.
Yeah, with its original, I don't know what colour you'd call that, sort of greeny aqua paint.
Yeah, original paint. Yeah, you don't want to remove that. And the stools are all kind of worn and torn, leather stools.
Yeah, and bits and pieces found in the factory. There's a toolmaker's bag, and a worker's tool bag there. That board there is the clocking in
on the wall. Yeah.
We've actually got the factory clock, which we are just trying to find a beautiful home for, because it's got a very long glass case. We don't want to get it broken. This originally, though, was it's called the incline cellar, so you can see the floor actually slopes down.
Slightly sloped.
Because of all the, obviously the champagne cider that they're making and disgorging. And these presses came from another factory called Godwin's. And Mr. Godwin and his brother made beautiful medieval style encaustic tiles. So the tiles that you get on cathedral floors that have got designs set into them with a contrasting clay. Really beautiful. Very successful. So in Victorian times, when there was this Gothic revival, all the churches were ordering them. And then he stopped doing that. He started making cider instead. So he was a very successful cider maker. He's a very philanthropic gentleman as well. And these came from his site, which was up at Homer. And now they got taken over eventually by Bulmers. Bulmers then produced a sparkling perry called Golden Godwin's, which they were trying to rival Babycham with, but now Godwin's is no more.
They just needed a big, iconic, kind of relatable figure. The Babycham, the deer itself is too cute.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, so they didn't have that, but they had a very popular English actress at the time who was their face of the Golden Godwin Perry. So she's called the English Marilyn Monroe, but she was actually a really good actress in her own right. Diana Dawes, the blonde bombshell.
Uh-huh.
And quite a naughty lady afterwards.
I love the foresight to create a room that's sloping. Reminds me of a room that my father built because we lived on the riverside. It would flood, and so he sloped the room so everything went out the door. So it's almost an optical illusion. If Elizabeth hadn't pointed out, I wouldn't have been really sure. But yeah, this room is sloping. It has a number of different presses. And you can see the old belts they use, the barrels, the whole setup. It's quite remarkable. Yeah.
This is the...
She's opening up a secret door here, I see.
It's the cellar we've just had rebuilt, basically.
The cellar you just had rebuilt. It's a dark room we're going into. And, the future is here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll open. This is stunning. So all steel I-beams in here and quite clean. It's all brick walls. It's going to be a display room for...
Well, we have to be careful in the cellars. We can't have anything that's too fragile because the relative humidity is obviously higher than upstairs. But this could be, it could be a more interactive space. We could put things down here that wouldn't be affected if they did get damp. But some people have come down here and said, hey, wouldn't it be great to do a roller derby or something?
I could see that. It's a nice floor. You redid the floor and everything, right?
Yeah. So originally we had to redo this. This is just, it's been a year-long project because above here is the backyard, and over the decades since the factory was taken down, the water's been percolating through the original Victorian concrete, and so the steel's delaminated really. So it all had to be replaced, and
wow, what a job.
Yeah. So when we put these steels back in, the original ones that we took out were red, and I just thought, I don't know, what colour should we do it? I want them to be really visible, but classic, so let's go for sort of a whitey cream. And then we were looking through an old catalogue, and it had a reproduction of a 1920s postcard, and they were originally whitey cream.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Talk about meant to be.
Yeah.
My goodness. Well, this room is feet-wise, I'm going to say it's about, say 60 feet long and by 30 feet wide. So it's a lot of space here with the steel I-beams going vertical, upholding steel I-beams. And it's like a concrete floor overhead. It's a bit chilly in here for now, but talk about ambient temperature. I don't know. I think the cider makers would be rolling in here to say, can I use this as a cellar? There's a reason why they had it as a Bulmer cellar. Yeah. My goodness.
That's something, actually, I had a chat with Albert from Ross Cider some time ago. Wouldn't it be great to have a selection of cider that we test after 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, see how cider ages? Yes. And obviously we've got the cellars for it.
Absolutely. I love it.
It could be art gallery, it could be film gallery, but there's potential. We've done
something's going to happen here, Elizabeth, and we are following along.
So the building itself is fascinating. The story is fascinating. We tell the nationalist story of cider, but because Bulmers did quite a lot of innovation in their time, and we have got all of their archives, we can tell that story very strongly. Mm-hmm. But you can also trace the fact that Hereford got the biggest cider making company in the world right back to the 17th century. There's a clear lineage back to the developments that they were making in the county in the time of King Charles II. So Herefordshire, big county, small population, has always punched above its weight, I think, when it comes to cider.
Well said. Now, the actual museum itself has revolving exhibits, doesn't it?
Yes, it's set up very much as it was when they first opened, with a big farmhouse stone press. Obviously, we can't move that, a stone mill. It's not going to go anywhere. and the floor is reinforced to take it, so that's not going to go down into the cellars, you'll be pleased to know. But we do try and have different things for people to see. So currently we've got a beautiful exhibition of photographs that were taken just before lockdown and during lockdown by a very talented photographer called Tessa Bunny. And that's quite they're stunning, but also they really show what happened with when the apples, they couldn't be sent out from Somerset, they were meant to be going out to Magna's. Mm-hmm. And of course, COVID, we couldn't do that. So you've got these piles of apples, and then she's got photographs of key cider makers, so you can spot familiar faces. And so, yes, we try and ring the changes.
Mm-hmm. You had women in cider. That was quite an exhibit. Is that what it was called, or?
Yes, gosh, that's quite a long time ago now. That's 2019.
2019? No, yeah. I thought it was more recently.
Well, we did keep it up for quite a while because it was meant to be, again, it's meant to be a temporary exhibition. It was Women in the Art of Cider. And it was so popular, and it spoke the right message at the right time. So I left it up. I've still got all the components. I might put it up somewhere else.
I hope so. Yeah. That seems like an endless dialogue right there to kind of keep on putting forward.
Yeah.
Something that doesn't get talked about a lot. What are some of the future exhibits that you foresee happening in like the coming years? Is there like a long-term program plan that you work on?
We've got a little events committee that we're building on, having our long-term, a year in advance events up on the website. But what we're planning for next summer is an exhibition around the art of cider labels.
Oh, lovely.
We're particularly fortunate in the county to have Artist Raw Cider, Tom and Lydia is a hugely talented artist, and it was something that we've been talking about doing for a long time. I do remember what was that for? Martin Barclay down at Pilton Cider did an exhibition of American cider label illustrations at one point, and I just thought, there's a lot to be tapped into there, because we've got a lot of archives from different cider companies, and some of the 1930s ones are just so beautiful. But if we can do ancient and modern and see how it's changed, I think that's be a nice exhibition.
Yeah, and I just want to mention Lydia and Tom, that's from Artist Straw, which is a cidery not too far outside of the center here in Hereford. Yeah.
Well worth visiting.
Yeah, and labels are so interesting because they could be political and they could be politically incorrect.
Yes.
And how that changes, and so it's really a signature of the time.
Yeah.
And some are evergreen, right, and can keep on going forward. So probably a good destination to come to, specifically if you are a cider maker in the brands category, your commercial that is, to be both inspired and to sometimes also get a cautionary note. You know, I've seen that in some American labels that were much more, well, I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
You can see how some brands is like, no, probably not right for the times, and then it changes. So, that'll be really interesting. So on the day-to-day operations, your visitors are coming from all over the globe, I suspect, to come to the museum. Is that what you're finding?
Yes. So we get tourists coming to the county who want a flavour of Herefordshire, and so they come. But we also have a wonderful demographic of cider pilgrims who come, and that's
cider
great.
Pilgrims. Oh, I love that. Is that like an inside kind of label for folks on the voyage for cider?
Oh, well, it is. That's what I give them anyway.
I love it. Yeah. I'm a cider
people
pilgrim.
are really dedicated, and quite a lot of museums. The younger adult group is a bit of a missing age bracket, and they have to work really hard to get them in. But thanks to craft artisan cider, the allure of it, we do have a really good representation of that age group coming through. And it's great, I mean, we get people coming we've had Norway, Sweden, Japan, Brittany, America, of course. It's great, and it really helps to feel part of the bigger community when people come here and swap stories.
Yeah. And the other bonus is that you could come to the museum and you could also purchase cider here, right?
Yeah.
We don't necessarily see that in the U.S. for cider museums. So that's a really nice added bonus that you get thirsty and then you could purchase a cider here. I'm wondering, do you ever have events where it's kind of like an adult's evening of drinking cider, or has any multimedia kind of exhibitions here in that way?
Well, one thing, we're experimenting. At Halloween, we've got something coming up where we're turning all the lights off apart from the emergency lights
Oh, my
in the
goodness.
cellars, and we're dressing them all up, and we're going to have a cast of haunted characters who are posing riddles. And so it's like one long escape room, and then if you escape out the other end, then you get your cider cocktail. So
That's
we're having
inspiring.
such fun just setting that up. We're probably the staff probably having more fun than the visitors at the moment.
I'm changing my flight. I'm going to stick around for that. That sounds great. Is that a little bit about what your job is? What's inspiring you to stay in this role?
Definitely what inspires me to stay in this role are the cider makers, the cider community. It's such a fabulous community, and there's so much support, and they're innovative, they're generous with their time, and it's just a really exciting place to be. And the history is fascinating. I've temporarily put it on hold, but I'm doing a postgraduate degree looking at early print sources all to do with cider. I keep coming across American ones as well, which is really interesting.
Print sources, you mean texts or any writing about cider that you can find? Okay.
Yeah, so sometimes it can be in orcharding manuals, it can be in medical textbooks, but in people's diaries, anything that's printed I'm looking at, and there's so much still to discover. Really, it's an area that needs a lot more research, and that's something that we really want to promote here, get more research going. Because we've got a nationally significant collection, so we need more people to come appreciate it. So what keeps? What do? I do a bit of everything. This is when you're a small staff, you actually have to be a jack of all trades, master of a couple, hopefully. So I can be doing anything from doing strategic meetings to HR to marketing, planning the events, working with the collections officer, working with researchers. Anything really, mopping the floor if there's an accident. That's what happens in a smaller establishment. I think.
It makes sense. I'm kind of curious about the general regions. Not really seeing a lot surrounding cider, like those touchstones of like a giant apple, for instance, that you might see in other parts of the world. How do you work around that? Because it's sometimes hard to be seen in the mass of just the everyday life for people to continue to stand out. Do you have any tips there or things that you're struggling with that?
You put your finger exactly on it. Cider is something that the average Herefordian will say, oh yes, we make cider, we're proud of cider. But actually, how aware are they of all the different craft cider makers, the niche places? Because you need to know where they are, because you're right, it's not obvious. We haven't got a massive apple in the centre of Hereford. We've got a Hereford bull in the centre of Hereford statue. And it's something that previous mayors, Paul Stevens and Kath, have tried to really get behind. So when we had, in 2019, we had an international cider tourism forum here. We raised the funds and we put on Ciderlands. That was really inspiring. And what we were trying to do then was capture some of the pride that we saw in the Basque community with how central cider was to their socialising, to their sense of who they were. And I came back inspired and thinking, if only we can get people to feel the pride of Herefordshire is cider. And I think we were making some progress, and then COVID kind of took the wind out of our sails. And then Applefest was set up, I think this is the third year that it's been running, as an attempt to get that awareness. And so it's a 2-week event put on by the City Council, and they're fringe events, and so it's this is coming up for the last weekend. We're ending with a cider banquet, which was something that we did at Ciderlands and they were inspired by. So we really need buy-in from councillors. We really need the county to be really proud of it. It's a time of austerity. Local authority funding has been really hard hit. They're doing their best, but people need to put money behind it really, and just really appreciate what we've got. And it's an uphill challenge, I think, at the moment. Hopefully, as the economy improves, it's got to improve, it will get better.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is the golden egg of the goose. And sometimes folks don't see what the potential is there. What we hear coming out of the UK is primarily out of Herefordshire, not necessarily Somerset.
That's interesting.
Makers here, such as Ross on Wye Cider and Perry Company, Tom Oliver, Little Pomona. Those are 3 big brands that are pretty well known for the cider community in the U.S. So if folks are coming here, it becomes a destination immediately. I could see the potential would be enormous for tourism. So what you're doing here with Applefest can keep on rolling to something else and load up all the hotels, load up all the restaurants, load up all the extra value-added products that go along with that. Everybody wants to experience UK cider. I mean, it's so unique. Your traditions are so endearing, and it's really motivated myself. And I know so many of the community around are looking at this part of the world very closely and has a lot of support and enthusiasm. So I hope that they hear this and realize that that is critical. You have to spend money to make money, and then sometimes it just starts rolling along from there.
Yeah.
But it truly is. I mean, it's a destination. You should be proud of it. I mean, I'm proud, and I'm not even British, but I'm proud to be here and to see this museum. It's absolutely spectacular.
You could be our honorary Herefordian.
I will take that. You heard it here. I do have my pair sweater on.
Yeah, I love that. We've got a lot to tap into. I mean, the other regions, Somerset is so beautiful, and there's so much going on. Trip to Borough Hill, I mean, that's an amazing place. Sam Knight over in Kent, they're doing really exciting things. But yes, you're right, Hereford somehow, well, we have got the wonderful orchards, but we have become a bit of an epicentre. Those three people that you just mentioned have, they've put us on the map.
They really have, yeah.
Even more than we were already.
Because I know there are people who are looking to do the same what you've done here with the Museum of Cider for other parts of the world, and are inspired about hearing your story. And the museum in general is really arose in the center of town in that way. What do you say to folks who are trying to do something like this?
I think we're in love with the subject. And whenever we give talks, Alicia and I, people say, Alicia's our collections officer.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so enthusiastic. But it's so fascinating.
Yes, there you go.
And I've always had enthusiasms, interests, but somehow I don't know what it is about cider, but I think there's so many directions you can go with it that it's endlessly absorbing. So that keeps me going, I think.
And do you have a favorite exhibit here? Do you have one that you just go and kind of gaze at, or you steer people to?
Yeah, I think it's got to be the 18th century cider glasses, because when I came around for interview, I was interested in food history, in 16th century and 17th century food history. Cider wasn't particularly on my radar, even though born and brought up in the county. And when this job came up, I thought, well, I'll come back to Herefordshire. This seems like an opportune time to go for this job. Walked round the museum, went round the corner, saw this case of these stunning small glasses with beautiful air twist stems and little engraved bowls. And I just thought, they're so beautiful. I just want to work with those. I was here for about 3 years before I actually touched them. I was too afraid to touch them. We're safe in the case. But they're not only beautiful, but they also tell a story. So each engraving tells a bit of a story. They're all different shapes and sizes, but you'll get ones that are engraved with barley, grapes and dapples, which shows that some of them were used for fine wine, fine ale. But then you've got other ones that have got no excise engraved on them, which was all about the 1763 tax on domestic production of cider and how people rioted, and which had implications for America as well.
It sure did.
So they're fascinating, beautiful things. And we've got a wonderful collection of antique books on cider that were collected by Bertram Bulmer and Gillian Bulmer, and they were donated to the museum. So being able to handle a 17th century book, a John Whirlidge book, that's a real honour. Really.
Yeah, you have one of the coveted jobs in the cider world, I think, because you're really in the history and you're getting inspired. And I just think I hope everyone listening out there in Ciderville has this as one of their bucket list destinations in the world to come to. And if you get a chance to meet Elizabeth, you're in for a treat, and to see the glasses, and to just pull up to a building that says the Museum of Cider, that gives you pause, especially if you're in the trade and you're wanting some inspiration. It's truly a community, and that's something to embrace.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our featured guest, Elizabeth Pimblett, the museum director at the Museum of Cider, based in Hereford in the West Country of England. I want to follow up about a couple things that we were talking about. One is the events, and she had mentioned about having a Halloween night. I highly recommend following the Instagram account for the Museum of Cider, because even the reels that they're putting out for it was really, really well done. And Elizabeth was featured in some of them. And it looked like a fun time. If I was in Hereford around that time, this coming October, I would definitely put it in my calendar to attend that evening of a Halloween night in the Museum of Cider. So they are certainly upping the game. And she also mentioned the actress Diana Dors, who was like a blonde bombshell, as they would call folks at that time. And her last name is Dors. And look up her image online. And, that was a perfect description of who that woman was. And just another mention for a past episode that I did with Mark Tudor, which was titled How a Cider Teapot Fueled the American Revolution. I'm making mention of that because if you are into any type of history and how she talked about the taxation for cider and how there was rioting, well, that actual time, it really did fuel the American Revolution. It taught the future Americans how to protest because they didn't really have any type of role model for that. So the Brits taught the Americans how to protest because of cider. So some rich history there. You see, teapots that you would have on the table, right? You make a pot of tea. They were the bumper stickers of the time to make a statement. Now, there's a number of really cool things about this. One, in that it really centered around cider and cider makers in Great Britain, teaching Americans how to really revolt. And two is that they used teapots. If you think back to the 1700s, it was a pretty important item to have in a house if you had a nice teapot. And they would put different slogans on. Well, you have two sides of a teapot on both sides. So think of it as a political bumper sticker, but on a teapot. And so they use that to kind of show their dissent. And we're really a guiding light for the colonists at that time to really respond to tyranny and say no, especially to taxation. And so that led to the repeal of the Stamp Act in America, which was when Great Britain was looking for more revenue. They were going to put a duty tax on newspapers and all legal and commercial documents, which kind of made it almost like impossible for anybody to get ahead. And so they had this model of resistance by the British cider makers and their Cider Act teapots, and they saw they could also revolt against taxation too. And as a result, the Stamp Act never gained any footing, and it was repealed a year after it was introduced. So there you go. You know, we find these different symbolisms on how to stand up to tyranny. And cider, as always, has a major play in that role. So cool stuff. Definitely check out that episode with Mark Tudor. He was a curator at the Museum of the American Revolution, which is based in Philadelphia. And they have in their collections the Liberty Pot, which is one of these Cider Act teapots. There's very few of them that are around at all. And it's a pretty amazing history. And one that shouldn't be forgotten, which is why museums are so critical. The history of cider in this case at the Museum of Cider is so critical. So do support museums and make your way to Hereford to check out what they're all doing there. Now, for folks who listen to Cider Chat every single week, you may have noticed that the last 3 episodes I was featuring different leaders for associations here in the U.S., and I took a break from the UK series. So I do pop around a little bit, but we have more UK coming up, especially for next week, which is a really special episode for everyone here at Cider Chat Central, because it will be Cider Chat's 450th episode. Yes, and our little adios to season 9, which is really a big marker for this podcast that started in 2015. So here we are entering our 10th year. So we'll be talking a little bit about the past season 9, and we will also have a featured guest by the name of Roger Wilkins, who is also known as the Cider King. I thought it'd be a real treat to bring in a little bit of audio that I recorded when I was at his cidery this past October as I was doing the recon for the upcoming cider tour to the UK, because Roger is a very, very historical figure in his own right. And I just absolutely fascinated by the guy. And of course, we're going to be visiting him on the upcoming Totally Cider tour there later this year. So make sure that you are subscribed to Cider Chat now if you haven't already. And if you are interested in any of the upcoming cider tours, as always, send an email to info@ciderchat.com. And of course, if you get value from this podcast, if you listened this far, do become a patron today or hit the donate button at ciderchat.com. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Wind Caller, signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like ponds, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like ponds, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider.
Oh yes, we do.
We like ponds.
Oh yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like ponds.
Oh yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!